Hey folks, welcome back. I'm Dave and we're here in my shop where I build E-War guitars. This is going to be episode number 16 of the tutorial series on how to build an electric guitar. And in this series, we're building this guy right here. I just got the first round of my gloss finish on here yesterday, and I'm really digging the way this thing is looking. I love those red heart stripes and the red heart binding and the maple binding combination. I think it's really looking cool. Anyway, like I said, I got the first round of clear on here yesterday. But before you can do that clear, and if you want that finish that looks like it's a foot deep, you've got to start off right. You've got to do the right prep on the body, and you've got to use the right sealers and grain filler, which in this case I'm using Simtec sealer, and you've got to prep it just right. You do that, you're on your way to getting that really great high gloss finish. Anyway, I hope you stick around and check out the video. And if you dig it, how about you give me a like and subscribe. Anyway, let's get rolling with the video. Okay, so those my bridge and my tailpiece holes that came out really nice, and also drilled. I got a little 1/8 inch hole in the bottom of that guy right there, which goes down into the chamber in the body. That's going to be for my bridge ground. So it's time to get set up over there on my little sanding table, and turn on that vacuum and start hand sanding this. I'm going to go over everything with 180, mostly by hand, and I'm going to sand with the grain. And go up through all the grits up to probably through 320, I think. And then at that point, we'll get into sealing. So let's set up over there right now and get going, doing a little hand sanding. So I don't know why I just said I'm going to sand up through 320. I'll sand the wood up through 220, and I'll stop there. And that's usually more than sufficient to get a nice finish for your sealers. So I'll use different tools, like in the large flat areas, I'll use a sanding block like that. I'll use a little rubber erasers and whatnot. I'll wrap the sandpaper around it and I'll catch some of those other contours and everything that big block can't get to. And I'll use just different tools. I got a sanding rod and everything, I'll use all that. And I'm careful to sand with the grain, always sand with the grain. And I'm also careful not to flatten out any of those sharper contour lines, because I think that's what makes them beautiful, you know. So I'm very careful to not sand over that stuff and just kind of flatten off all the features in the guitar. And I'm going to go around like this and just sand every last bit of this thing until it's done. So once I'm done sanding, I like going over the body with naphtha and a rag, because if you've got any cross grain scratches or anything, this will sure help you find it. I try to look as carefully as I possibly can, looking for anything that's going to show up in the finish, because what you don't see now, you will definitely see in the finish, and the naphtha really helps. So I'm going to go over the whole thing carefully and clean it and look for any kind of imperfections. Yeah, so that naphtha is just great stuff. It's basically lighter fluid. It's a very mild solvent. It's great for, like I said, finding scratches, because you don't want those scratches in there. It cleans the pores of the wood out. It'll get out whatever's in there. It'll get the sawdust out of the pores. Get your fingerprints off, or whatever grease or whatever might be on the surface of the wood. Just helps get all that out. And it's kind of cool too, because it sort of brightens up the guitar, and you can sort of see what the eventual color is going to be when you start putting your finishes on. So it's just all around good stuff, and a really good idea to wipe it down really good. In fact, I'll do this during the course of me finishing too. I'll wipe it down several more times. All right, so all the woodworking on this thing is done right here. Got all the holes drilled, all the pieces and parts made and cut, and here's our control cavity covers. They're ready to go. And everything has been sanded up to 220 by hand with the grain. So I've checked it over carefully. I've put naphtha on it a couple of times while I was sanding to check for scratches, because you put a little naphtha or water on there or something. I like naphtha better because it doesn't raise the grain. But you put that on there and it'll reveal any scratches you might have that are going crosswise with the grain and everything. So anyway, so this thing is ready to go, and I think it's looking pretty good. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to start the finishing process. And so now this guitar, I'm basically going to do a natural finish, although I may mix up a little tinting in a couple of base coats. I may do a little amber to kind of highlight the grain a little bit and richen up the color possibly. And I also may do a very slight burst around the edge with some, maybe some brown, one of the brown trans tint dyes I have. Just very faint, very thin and very faint around the edge. I might, we'll see. We'll see when we get there. But the next step in this process before I get to any tinting or finish coats is we're going to do a sealer. And I use this for my grain filler and my sealer. And it's a Simtec sealer. It's called the 28X50. It's their easy sanding sealer. Now it's a polyester and it's a catalyzed finish, so I got to put this MEKP in it. And it just, it goes on really nice, and it's a rock solid finish. It's kind of tough to sand. They call it easy sanding sealer, but it takes a little bit of work to sand it. But you can get just a glass smooth finish with this stuff. And it's a great base for any of your tint bases you might put on top, or a clear coat on top of that. So, so we're getting set to do that. And like I showed you a second ago, I've got my little other pieces. They're double-sided sticky tape to this little handheld so I can hold it here and spray it. I've got a couple of pieces of, this is a piece of walnut and a piece of mahogany, and I'll go through, I'll shoot these first with everything I'm going to do. That way I can test if I do any colors, and I can adjust the gun and shoot these and just kind of make sure before I actually spray it onto the guitar. So anyway, so when you're using this polyester, you've got to wear safety glasses. I've got a respirator here. In fact, I just put brand new filters in the thing. And I also wear a Tyvek suit too that covers me with a hood and everything, because this stuff is sticky as hell and it'll get on everything. So anyway, I've kind of got my little spray booth set up over there. I think I'm about ready to go. First thing I'm going to do though, before I start hanging it up and getting ready to start spraying, is I got to mask off the fretboard. So we're going to do that. I'm going to wipe it all down again with some naphtha, and then we're going to hang it up over there in my spray booth and start spraying. Anyway, let's get rolling with that. So this is a very exciting part of the guitar build process for me. I've been working on this thing for a couple of months now, and finally going to start shooting some finish on it. So this is pretty exciting. You know, even something seems as insignificant as taping off that fretboard, it's got a method to it, and you've got to do it just right. You want to make sure that your tape edge lines up exactly on the edge of the fretboard. You want to make sure to burnish that tape in really well so nothing leaks in up under the tape. You know, when you're done with this guitar and everything looks absolutely beautiful, except you got one or two little imperfections, they'll just stand out like a sore thumb. So you got to be careful and meticulous about really everything you do, even something insignificant like masking off the fretboard. So I hang this thing up on my little spray booth over there, and of course I'm using the location of the strap button. I just put a little eye hook in there, and I've got another little clip that goes onto that holds it onto the rope. Now I'm wiping the whole thing down again with the naphtha. Now this time I'm using gloves, because I don't want to touch this body again and get any oils off of my hands onto the end of that wood before the finish goes on. So, and I'll just let that dry while I'm mixing up my Simtec. And I'll mix up, it's about 3/4 of a cup I use, and I get about I guess a little short of a cap full of the MEKP in there, the catalyst, and that seems to work out really well. Now that gun I'm using, that's an HBLP gun with a 1.2 millimeter tip that, to me, it lays that Simtec sealer on about as good as you can get it. And it's not perfectly smooth, but it's pretty good. All right, so this is dried overnight now, my Simtec sealer, and I think it's looking really good. We got a really nice even coat on the thing. I don't think it's too thick, and I don't think it's too thin. Check out how that Red Heart binding is beginning to look in that with a little bit of finish on it. Absolutely gorgeous in those stripes up the back. Isn't that great? Anyway, so the next thing we got to do, this is good and dry. We're going to go over, set up on my sanding bench over there, and I'm going to use some 220 grit paper, and we're going to knock this down. You can still see all the ripples and everything. That's where it's soaking into the pores of the wood and everything and sealing everything up good. And we're going to knock this whole thing down with some 220. I'm going to use the DA sander on the big flat areas, but then I'll use my little rubber erasers and stuff and get into these contoured spots and get this all, we'll knock it all down, we'll level it all off, and we'll get it ready for another coat. So anyway, let's get set up over there and get going on that. So that first coat of Simtec sealer, it goes on really thick, and it's really sinks way down into the pores of the wood. And the idea is you want to sand as much of that stuff off as you possibly can, and get it level without breaking all the way through down to the raw wood. So although it's getting a whole nother coat, so if you did break through in a couple of spots, it's not that bad of a thing. Unless you got stain under there, then that could be a problem. But this one doesn't have any stain under it, so breaking down to that raw wood wouldn't be a killer on it, you know. But you want to get it as thin as you possibly can, and get it level as you possibly can on this first coat. Then the next coat's going to go on there a lot smoother, and that one again too, you want to cut it down as thin as you possibly can, because you don't want a big thick plastic coating on the outside of this guitar. You want enough to fill the grain, level off everything, and get a good base for your clears to go on without being too thick. So doing it by hand is really the best way to do it. And I spend probably an hour and a half or 2 hours going over this guitar from end to end on it, getting this first coat of sealer sanded down and ready for the next coat. Okay, so she is all sanded, knocked it all down with 220 and 320. I used 320 on the corners. Oops, my tape ain't sticking. I use 320 on the corners because I'm trying to keep as much built up on the corners as possible. Because for whatever reason, finish doesn't like to stick on the corners. So I like to keep it built up. So I don't want to take off too much, but I still want to scuff the entire surface, which I've done. And I've got it all pretty smooth. But it definitely requires another coat, another round of the which will really be probably 2 more coats, or 2.5. The tack coat and 2 flow coats of the Simtec. And that'll hopefully be it. This is, after all, a walnut and mahogany and maple. And though there's grain to fill, they're not like ash or something, which could take more. You may be wondering why I pulled the tape off when I sanded this. Why didn't I just leave the tape on and sand up to it? And the reason being is I take it off after every coat. So when I sand this edge right here, if I was to do 2 rounds of sealer and then, let's say, 6 or 8 or 9 coats of finish on top of this, I'm going to have a really thick edge built up right here, right along the edge of my fingerboard. So I'm going to take the tape off each time, and I sand that as thin as I possibly can along there, to where you can't feel any kind of a buildup along the edge of the fingerboard. So taking the tape off each time helps doing that. So anyway, I'm going to get the rest of this tape on there. We're going to hang it up. We're going to give it a good wipe down with naphtha and blow it off. And we are going to shoot another round on. And hopefully all goes well as planned. Okay, so we've gone through 2 rounds of the Simtec sealer now. Sanded in between the rounds, of course, and each round I did basically a tack coat and then a flow coat on each one. And this coat here, I mean, it really looks nice. It looks very smooth. It's got a bunch of orange peel on it and stuff. But I do believe I've got all the grain filled really nicely, and we'll find out here shortly when we sand, because we're about to sand it again. And hopefully after this sanding, we'll be able to move on to, if I decide to do some tint bases or something, or we'll just move straight on to the clear. It just depends. I've got a couple sample boards over there that I've been finishing along with this. I'm going to try some different tints on it to see what I think of that. So anyway, so we're going to get sanding on this, and I wanted to show you what I use, because this stuff is awesome. It's called Super Aslix. It's amazing paper. It's actually kind of a fabric-backed sanding paper, and it's for doing this finishing type work. And I just love this stuff. I bought this on Amazon, but there's other places to buy it too. Eagle Abrasives is the company that sells it. And anyway, this is what they call a K360. It has a very low scratch pattern. In other words, it has a very even grain size on this thing, and it'll do you a very nice job. 360, I think they say, is equivalent to basically 220, but I've got 360 and I've got 600, 800, I've got up to, I think, 1500 grit, depending on what I'm sanding. When I get into the final clears, I'll be working my way up through those other ones, but this 360 ought to do it for the sealer coat. And I'm going to use this, and this is a Velcro, micro Velcro deal. I'll use that for the big areas. That's a sanding pad that you get with the sandpaper. I'll also I got my little rubber eraser that I'll use to get into some of those tighter areas and up against these edges and whatnot. And that's what we're going to do. And I also have some of these, let's see if I can find it here. I got some of these foam pads too that I use with the sandpaper too. That's a foam, and these are really nice for getting into some of these contoured areas. Kind of helps disperse the pressure from your fingers so you're not digging into one spot. So anyway, we're going to get rolling on sanding this thing, and hopefully this will be it for the sealer and we can move on to other stuff. Anyway, I'm going to turn the camera down right now, and we're going to get going on this. I'm going to put on my headphones and listen to some music and start sanding. So I wanted to stop at this point and show you all what you're looking for. So, you know, this is, I call it sanding, but it's also called the leveling process. And the idea is you're using something flat and somewhat rigid like this, or this sanding pad here, which is a large flat surface. And as you're sanding these, especially the flat areas, well, all the areas really, depends on what tool you use, you're leveling this sealer or the finish with the finish around it. So you have a very glass-like finish without any little ripples or anything in it. And as you're sanding, you constantly are holding it up to the light. And like I can see it right here, I've got some very small shiny spots right here. And I'm going to try to turn that camera around and show you what I'm talking about. But that's what you're looking for. You want to keep going while you're doing it. So you don't want to just take the sandpaper on the end of your finger and go at it on a small spot like that, because then you wind up doing a slight divot in the thing. You want to try to sand the whole surface down till all those little light spots are gone. And you want to do it with something, like I said, like one of these pads or something, or Or even this works for that too, because it's a foam pad, but it is somewhat rigid, and like I said, it disperses the pressure from your fingers. So I'm going to try to turn this camera, and I don't know, I'm going to tilt it up to the light and see if I could get this guitar in here and see if we could find some of those. So I don't know if you could see it in the camera, but there's like a spot right there that's got to get taken care of. And anyway, I don't know if you can see it in the camera, and I really can't tell from where I'm at. But what you want to do is you want to hold it up to the light like that and look for those tiny little shiny spots. And once you get all those little shiny spots out, then you should have a really nice base to go on with the rest of your finishes. Anyway, I'm going to point the camera back down here at this thing and continue sanding. I hope some of that made sense. So in my opinion, the secret to a really good finish on your guitar is all the stuff we're covering in this video right here. From the final sanding of the wood on the body and the neck, through the applying of the sealers and the sanding of these sealers. When you get to this stage right here, you got to check and recheck, and when you're all done checking, go through it and check again. Find any last little flaw or any defect you can find and take care of it now. And I promise you, when you're done, when you shoot those last coats of clear on there and you buff out that guitar, you're going to have something that just looks amazing. All right, folks, we better leave it there for now. This guitar is now ready to move on to the next step, shooting it with the gloss finish. Anyway, I hope somebody got a little something out of this thing. I enjoyed doing it. I'm loving the way this thing is coming out. And I just love building guitars. And I hope I'm inspiring somebody out there to give it a try. Because if I can do it, y'all can do it too. Anyway, thanks for watching. God bless you. We'll see you all in the next one.